Hello everyone, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom Channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno, and I want to thank you for checking out this video because this video is a big part of my journey, and I've talked to a lot of people on my channel who have expressed similar experiences in lessened anxiety and lessened depression since being on Lion Diet. I watched this video this morning, so this isn't technically a reaction because my reaction was watching it this morning. I didn't think it would be something that I would be sharing about here at the time. But after I watched it, I realized it's an important enough part of my journey for me to be able to share it with you. I think it hits home for a lot of folks. A lot of folks who start this way of eating find that they're able to get their mental attitude straightened out a lot easier. And though I think it is a huge part of what happens when you get ultra-processed foods out of your body, out of your mind, when you start getting away from the drugs that the pharmaceutical system is trying to put into our bodies all the time, that it can definitely have a big effect on your mental attitude. But there's a lot more to it than just food. As I've mentioned before, Lion Diet was a huge catalyst for me to make a full transformation in my life, not only my body, but also in my mind and in my spiritual life. And I want to kind of focus on the side that has helped me some that we haven't talked a whole lot about, because this might be important for you as well. So without any further ado, I'm just going to start playing the video, and then I'll pause it occasionally to talk about something that he said and share some of my experience there. And hopefully this will help a lot of other people be able to find their way out of a very dark place. Let's go.
Good morning, Dr. Peterson. You speak a lot about negative emotion. As someone who's very prone to negative emotion and borderline neurotic, I have fairly severe anxiety problems that are being controlled with SSRIs currently. Anyway, my question is there a way to change your temperament? If you're prone to negative emotion, is there a way to fix that permanently? Well, there are ways of modifying it. I spoke a little earlier today about the self-authoring programs. I would say you could try those. That'll help. The evidence that writing about your past, unresolved issues in your past, let's say remaining mysteries, reduces the overall level of stress that you carry with you, because your body computes your average level of stress by calculating something like the proportion of things you don't understand that have happened to you to the proportion of things that you do understand. And you want that ratio to be low. You want to have understood virtually everything that happened to you, so that if the same situation, same potentially problematic situation that did you in the past arises in the future, you know how to deal with that. So getting your story straight in relationship to your past is important. Doing the same in relationship to your future is crucial, because that reduces another level of uncertainty.
Before I let him get too far into the future part, I do want to say that one of the things that I had done in January, the same month that I started eating Lion Diet, was that I took Jordan Peterson's personality assessment test that kind of grades you on a number of different levels that deal with the psychological makeup. And one of the key factors that the person who wrote into Dr. Peterson here mentioned was that he was fairly high in neuroticism. I don't know what fairly high in neuroticism was, but I know that my level was rather high on the neuroticism side, because I had a lot of negative emotion, especially at the time that I took this test, which, could be a big effect on the overall outcome of the test. One of the things he talked about when I read about this testing was that really you can't change these numbers for any dramatic degree. But I am interested to take it again sometime. I just haven't done it yet. But he had mentioned that you don't want to take it again, because after having taken it, it's kind of like you already know what you kind of want to answer to lead it in a certain direction. Now, it's been 3 years for me, and so much has happened since then. I really don't think that my taking that test 3 years ago in the state of mind I was in would have a tremendous effect on it. So I am interested to do it again, and I probably will take it again. But I'm pretty sure I already know how it's going to come out, and I'll get into that in a moment. The interesting thing he mentioned was the past authoring program that he offers. I also signed up for his self-authoring program, and I started to work on the past authoring program, where you take certain events from your childhood or your past that stand out as important to you for one reason or another. And I noticed that the ones that I chose all had some kind of negative context, except maybe one. It's been a long time since I've even done that. But I will say that just going through the motion of thinking through as an adult things that I dealt with as a child and a teenager helped me to put those things into almost an immediate perspective, where I was able to say, you were a dumb kid. You didn't know anything then. You didn't have enough knowledge to make a decision about the things that you dealt with at that time. And now looking back on that time period from the perspective of somebody who was in his late 40s at the time of taking this exam, I'm 50 now. Now I didn't take that test until maybe a year or so into eating this way. I already started to notice results with regard to lessened anxiety very early on. So getting the poison food, getting the poison that's in our food out of my system, all that ultra-processed garbage that makes up 60% of the average American diet, or the diet of somebody living in the UK or Australia or even Canada, according to a book that I'm reading here right now, and I'll share that in another video. But getting all that stuff out of my system has had a tremendous effect on my overall well-being. Let's go on and see what else he's got to say here.
Domain of uncertainty. If you're uncertain about where you're going or why, that makes you chronically stressed. Okay, so that can help. If you do those things, you straighten out your story about who you are and where you're going, that will lower your baseline levels of neuroticism. Now, conscientious conduct also decreases neuroticism. There's a negative correlation between conscientiousness and neuroticism, and it looks causal in that more orderly and industrious people suffer less from negative emotion. Okay, and that's probably because they put their environments in order, right?
Interestingly, my conscientiousness was high. So it was kind of an odd thing to see high level of neuroticism and a high level of conscientiousness.
They actually keep order in their immediate environment, so things are neat and orderly around them, but they also work hard so that the future is more stable. Okay, so then what else? There's an emergent literature showing that excess concern about the narrow self is associated with self-conscious suffering. So, for example, you can discriminate between people who are depressed and or psychotic and those who are not with about 75% accuracy by calculating the relative number of self-referential pronouns that are used in speech or writing of the people involved. And the more people concentrate on themselves, their narrow selves, the more miserable they are. And that's buttressed by findings showing that in the scales that measure trait neuroticism or negative emotionality, self-consciousness is actually a facet of the scale itself, which means that acute self-consciousness is so tightly associated with misery that they may be essentially the same thing. So now you can't really...
That hits me right between the eyes, because like I said, that strange marriage of being highly conscientious but also being high in neuroticism was a weird thing to perceive based on what he's been saying here. But I've been living that for so long, where I do make sacrifices. I do things for other people. I would do for my family. But there was a lot of focus on that being about me. It being about me somehow. And I didn't see that so much. It was mostly people around me that would be able to tell me, you're all focused on you. This is always about you. Everybody's problem is about you. And I couldn't understand that. But I think a huge part of the change that I've gone through is that I don't look at things quite the same way as I did before. I used to look at things that I wanted, things that I had to have, with a whole different attitude. Like if it wasn't exactly the way that I wanted it or planned it, or I didn't earn or achieve what I needed to get the things that made my life feel complete, then I would be very upset about those things, and they would drag me down. Now I have such a little need for things that things just don't interest me like they used to. I'm not as interested in playing games or doing something that is entertaining to a degree. I do still like to do things that are entertaining, but I would rather do it watching it with, doing it with somebody I love than just for myself. I don't even find as much enjoyment in it if it's by myself at all, because I would rather be doing something constructive now. I would rather be doing something that is going to build up my family or build up my household, or use things that are tools, not necessarily use things that are for self-pleasure or entertainment. And it's an interesting transition, but I think it had a lot to do not only with the diet, but also with being able to mentally put myself in a position to do the things that I've been doing, because I realized that my family depends on me. And then on top of that, this channel kind of came up as a surprise to be such a motivational factor for so many people, that the responsibility that I see in my role here when I talk to you guys who follow me and have been watching me for years, it motivates me to move forward every day. It's not about making a success of myself on YouTube, although that is great because it allows me to do additional things. It allows me to be able to pay for my family's bills and to be able to support what I'm trying to do here, that I can afford the equipment that I need to keep YouTube going and things like that. But it's not the motivating factor. It's more of a consequence of the motivating factor, which is to give this that I've found in Lion Diet, in a carnivore way of eating, and express all of the things that I face along with it, as I've seen myself transform physically, mentally, and spiritually with those of you who are watching, because I know so many of us are going through the same things that I was going through and that I'm still going through when it comes to what's going on in the world, what's going on in politics, what's going on in our daily lives, how our freedoms are being attacked, how we're being censored, and so many things are going on. I'm right there with you guys. But the difference now has to do with my focus not being about it being about me. It's about other people, whether it's my wife and my family, or those in my community, or you guys right here on YouTube. It has a very big changing effect on my mental attitude overall. And anytime that I wind up getting focused on what I want, that's when I get more wrapped around the axle. That's where I find myself saying, okay, nothing is comfortable. And I start to feel that anxiety. And then I just have to say, all right, Lord, help me to do that second commandment, to love my brother as myself, to focus on doing for others as opposed to doing for myself. That way I can stay focused on the things that actually make me live a healthy physical, mental, and spiritual life.
Escape from that trap by consciously trying to think less about yourself, because if you start thinking less about thinking about yourself, you just end up thinking more about yourself. That's not helpful. But what you can do, this is extremely useful, is you can start thinking about how to put other people at ease and what you can do for other people, like how you can be of service. And paradoxically, because that takes the self-conscious stress off you, then your negative emotion levels will fall. So, if you find yourself ruminating about yourself and your concerns, you can actually learn how to switch your thinking to what you might do to make the lives of the people around you better. And that could be, your immediate partner, for example, or your immediate family members, or your friends, or your business partners, or people in the broader community. Service to others is one of the ways out of negative self-focused emotion. We have this strange idea in our culture that the more we encourage young people to be concerned about their mental state, let's say, the more value we're attributing to them and the more good we're going to do them on the mental health side. And that couldn't be less true. It's actually an anti-truth. To overprotect people and to have them focus on their own concerns is definitely a pathway to misery. Now, the other thing I would say, this is useful too, something you could try to do is, imagine I ask you, say, why don't you just sit down one day for an hour, or maybe across a couple of days, and write down all the things that you're afraid of and avoiding that are necessary for you to do to move forward, right? So these would be things that you're not doing that you know you need to do in order for you to move to where you want to move. And so you need to make a pretty exhaustive list of those. Then you need to break each of those down. You need a strategy, and a written strategy would be very helpful. You need a strategy of exposure. You know, I mean, like maybe you're behind on your tax documents, let's say, you know, or there's some other stack of paperwork sitting on your desk that you're not attending to because you're afraid. And there may be lots of things in your life that you're not attending to because you're afraid. And so, first of all, you want to admit to what those things are, and you can ask yourself that. Then you want to write them down. Then you want to come up with a strategy for starting to deal with them. You know, so like if it's a stack of unpaid bills that you're terrified of and that you've been avoiding for a few months or even worse, you're going to be pretty damn afraid to even take a look at the problem. But it'll almost inevitably be the case that if you take a look at the problem, a detailed look, the reality will be less terrifying than the specter that your imagination has conjured forth. And maybe the thing you can do for the first day when you decide to actually turn around and face the dragon, let's say, is all you'll do is open the file folder with all the documentation of what you're avoiding in it and just glance through it, like for 5 minutes, just to break that paralysis. You know, or maybe you have to spend 15 minutes gathering the dispersed documents that are in whatever the hell passes for your filing system together so they're all in one place. Some move forward. And so what you want to do is you want to think about what it is that's producing negative emotion in you, your doubts and your concerns, and then you want to develop a strategy of incremental approach.
I can definitely speak to the efficacy of that because I talked about this early in my videos with you guys, where I talked about slaying those dragons in your life. And it came from Jordan Peterson imparting that knowledge to me, to have that courage to get up and just do those little things that need to be done. I'll give you an example. One of the things I was dealing with was a credit issue that was dealing with a bill that was owed to a hospital. And I just had been putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and it was making my credit score go down. I was getting calls, and I got tired of dealing with this thing. And one day I just went and faced it, and it took some time. It took like a few hours of working on the phone and talking to people. But in the end, everything resolved itself. They wound up just wiping it off the record. I mean, that doesn't happen every time, but it's not going to happen at all if you don't get up and attack that problem, if you don't have a look at it and make a plan to deal with it, even if it's not the plan you want to make. But sometimes it works out where, holy cow, I killed the dragon with one shot. I was able to sling the rock and hit the stone hit the giant right in the forehead with the stone and take him down. Sometimes it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen if you don't pick up the stone, if you don't go try to attack the problem.
And that will also fortify you, partly because you reduce the number of things that you're afraid of by actually dealing with those things so they go away. You actually solve the problems, but also you train yourself to see that you're the sort of person that doesn't have to run from their problems no matter what they are. And that deep learning that you are that sort of person is in fact the solution to the problem that you're describing with regards to severe anxiety. Now, the other thing I would say too, and I don't know anything about you obviously, is you think that your anxiety and perhaps associated depression is psychological, right? And you think that the reason the SSRIs are dealing with it is because they're having a psychological effect, but there are a lot of reasons to be anxious. So, for example, there is good evidence that depression, in many cases, and associated anxiety, let's say, can be a consequence of inflammatory autoimmune problems. And you can look that up for yourself, the relationship between depression and immune dysfunction, especially inflammation. And you got to ask yourself, is there something wrong with you that's making you anxious? You may be physically ill in some complex way. My daughter and members of my family have had a lot of good fortune treating high levels of negative emotion with dietary alteration. As you may know, because it's somewhat well known we only eat meat. And there's a huge literature emerging on the utility of ketogenic and carnivorous diets to redress serious physical and psychological disorders.
You know, it's funny. I didn't even hear when he said this. When I told you I watched it this morning, I was on my way out to work, so I might have got distracted or I didn't finish the video. But when I was watching that beginning part, I said I knew I had to share this with you guys. So to hear him wrapping it up with the attack that I had to use, part of the attack I had to use to even start Lion Diet was what he was talking about there, just facing those dragons, feeling like I've got to deal with this dragon, that I've got to deal with this gut problem that I had, which turned out to be most likely an autoimmune disorder of some kind. But though it's never been diagnosed, there's no doubt that I've had tremendous results just from the diet alone. But the combined effort of attacking those dragons and having the courage to face those things and to still have to summon that courage daily to face what's going on today. The problems of today are enough for themselves. Every day you're still going to have troubles that you're going to have to face. And not facing those things, they pile up and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they run your life. They run you crazy. I think a lot of people are in a state right now where they've let that dragon grow so big that it's walking around with their house on them. I saw a cartoon's example where they were showing like a little dragon being in the house not being a big problem, but as the dragon just kept get bigger and bigger until finally it's walking with its tail sticking out of the back of the house and its head sticking out of the front of the house, and it's walking around carrying the house around. You know, at some point you got to deal with this thing because it's ruining your life.
So my daughter has done a podcast with a psychiatrist at Harvard, for example, at McLean Hospital, who's been investigating this quite deeply with regard to schizoaffective disorder, which is a very serious near psychotic disorder, a very deep problem that looks like it's physically rather than psychologically grounded. And the data on the carnivore diet in relationship to disease control is extremely positive. Now, there's not a lot of data yet. The studies are hard to do. But don't be so sure that the reason that you're miserable is because there's something wrong with you psychologically. It could easily be that it's the secondary consequence of some physiological illness that's going to be somewhat difficult to specify, right? Because autoimmune problems, the sort of autoimmune problems that cause inflammation, are difficult to specify. So you might want to figure out, like, do you have allergies? Do you have psoriasis? Do you have any other signs of autoimmune trouble? That's one way of starting, and any other physical illness-like symptoms, because that can help you triangulate on what might be driving your anxiety. But don't assume that it's all psychological, because it could well not be. You know, when I do I don't practice clinically now, but when I did differential diagnosis to begin with, trying to figure out what was wrong with my clients, I always started with the assumption that if they were seriously afflicted on the psychological side, that they may have been ill in some manner that hadn't been diagnosed properly. And that's very much worth considering. So anyways, that's not bad.
Well, it's certainly the case with me that it was a combined experience of what I was physically going through by eating the wrong foods, by having my body constantly inflamed. When you look at that opening picture of me standing side by side with myself from 8 months ago and myself from nearly 3 years ago, one of the things that stands out to me is that my skin is pink and red and looks like I'm just stingy and heavy and bloated. And yes, a lot of that was the fat that was there, but it was also the inflammation that my body was going through. I had somebody asking me about, how do you know you have inflammation? You'll know if you start to understand what inflammation is. And there's not one test that's going to narrow it down. That's one of the reasons why doctors weren't able to diagnose anything. But as I started to notice the physical and mental pain going away from getting these things out of my body, I could definitely tell that the inflammation was going down. And then when I had certain blood markers checked, like CRP, white blood cell count, and there's a couple of others that when taken together, they can let you know your inflammation markers. And mine were as low as they could be the last time I was checked on that. And you can see the difference in my skin in that opening picture from before and after, it's like a whole different person. Even though I do still have some rosacea, that's something that might be fungal related and not have as much to do with my diet. But even that had gone down for a while. And one of the things that crept its way back into my diet this year was some seed oils that I didn't know I was getting because I was eating meat on a regular basis that was being cooked on a grill that was being cleaned, or not cleaned, but sprayed with Vegeline to help grease the grill so the meat wouldn't stick to the grill when the chefs would flip it over. So I've gotten back to cooking my own food so that I can get away from that. And it looks like it's going to take a little bit of time for that to kick in. But there is no doubt that for me, it wasn't all psychological. And I didn't want to admit that it was psychological even back then. That's why I was not on any medicines for any of this stuff. I was just trying to struggle through and do the best I could with it. I was trying to muscle my way through this. And if it wasn't for the diet, I wouldn't have been able to change that. But if it wasn't for taking the approach of attacking that dragon, that problem that was with my gut, and realizing that there was something that I could possibly do to fix it, and I started down that path, and it was just like peeling away the onion. It was the parting of the water. There was the parting of the Red Sea, and just gave me my escape route because I was attacking that dragon. So I tell you guys, have courage. Have courage to face the dragons in your life. If you've got that stack of bills, if you got that health problem, have the courage to start taking on those things and attacking those problems. And you might find that the water will just part for you as well. And those problems can be in the past. It's not going to say your problems aren't going to come up in the future, but you'll be much better prepared to face those problems once you've started putting a lot of this stuff that you've been carrying around for a long time in your past. Anyway, that's all I got for this one, guys. I'll see you next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?
Be sure to check out Ferrigno Freedom Facebook group. This group is private so that you don't have to worry about all your personal information being shared with all of your friends. We're just here to encourage each other and keep each other on track.